Hi there, whether you've got the RS4 Mini combo kit or the standard kit, this video will help you get set up super quickly. The first thing you want to do, which is going to make the whole process easier, is to go and fit the little handle. Go and grab your RS4 Mini, grab the tripod and then screw it into the base, making sure it's nice and firm. Expand the legs and put it on the desk in front of you. Next thing you're going to want to do is grab the charging cable, and you want to attach this to the USB-C port. To find out how much charge you've currently got, just quickly tap the power button and then the screen will light up. We've got 29%. Before we attach the camera, we're going to go and activate the gimbal and also check that there's no firmware updates. Before you power this thing on for the first time, you're going to want to make sure you remove this bit of packaging. Press and hold the power button to power on the gimbal, and then go and select your language. Tap next. You can use this gimbal 5 times before you have to activate it, and to activate it you need to use the Ronin app. Make sure Bluetooth is turned on your phone and then launch the Ronin app. You'll need to go and log in with a DJI account. Choose the type of gimbal you want to connect to, in this case DJI RS4 Mini, and then tap connect. The RS4 Mini should show up. Tap that to connect to it. You can verify that we're connecting to the correct device. You can see this number on the RS4 Mini screen, and this is the same number that's on this phone, and then tap pair and tap connect on the gimbal. The default password is 12345678, hit connect. And right away we can see that we've got this update available, so we'll tap update now and make sure you're connected to Wi-Fi or mobile data to do this. You can see a list of all of the new things, and the screen on the gimbal will also tell you that it's updating the firmware. And while that's updating, we'll carry on with the rest of the setup. You're going to want to grab this plate from the box. This is going to attach to the camera, and also grab this screw. This plate has a super nice feature where you can extend this thing in and out, and this thing is going to clamp or support the front of the camera, and that's going to stop this plate from wobbling around and moving on the camera, which can result in jerky footage. So the first thing I'm going to do is hold this plate over the camera's mounting point. You can see that there. Then I'm going to push this till it touches the front of the camera, and holding that in place, I'm going to screw in this screw and make sure that's nice and firm. This plate shouldn't be able to rotate left and right if you've set this up correctly. Looks like the firmware update is 88% complete, which is awesome, because the next step is to go and attach the camera and get the gimbal balanced. You do want to make sure that whatever package you're putting to the gimbal, so that includes the camera, the lens, any accessories like a microphone adapter, memory card, battery, you want to make sure that the combination of the weight of all of those things is within the operating weight of this gimbal. Also, you're going to want to make sure that no part of your camera or lens or accessories will hit any part of the gimbal when it's moving around. Looks like the firmware update is complete. I'm going to tap OK, and now we can agree and activate this gimbal. You can see here I've got to log in with my DJI account, so I'll go and do that. Okay, activation is complete. The screen here is telling us that the firmware update was complete. You can also go and optionally add the DJI Care refresh. I'm not going to do that now, so I'm going to tap skip at the top right. I'm going to be doing a dedicated video on how to use the Ronin app with this gimbal, so subscribe if that's something you're interested in. Now we can go and mount the camera. You're going to want to make sure the gimbal is turned off for this, so I'm just going to hold in power button till it powers down. We're going to start off with this axis locked, so I'm going to hit that and just give it a gentle wiggle till it locks into place. Next thing we're going to do is attach this lower quick release plate onto the gimbal, and then the camera with the other release plate will attach here. You can see we've got these teeth underneath, and these line up to this cog here. You want to slide it in this way and push it back. And once you've slid that in, you can go and lock this lever. And that's going to lock this plate in place. Now we've got the plate on the camera and the plate on the gimbal, we can connect the two together. At the end of this lower quick release plate, you need to change this to the unlocked position to allow the camera to slide in. To make this bit so much easier, you can bring these up and lock these two arms, just so things aren't swinging about all over the place. Okay, grab your camera. You're going to want to slide this quick release plate so the back of the camera lines up to the back of the lever on the back of the quick release plate. Line it up slide it in, you can hear a click, and when it's in position, lock this lever back to the lock position, and that will lock this camera into the lower quick release plate. Double check that it's nice and secure on that plate. So now the camera is attached to the gimbal, we need to balance the gimbal against the weight of the camera and the lens and any accessories. We have to do this because we want the motors to be running as efficiently as possible so we get as smooth as possible footage. We also don't want the motors to be using more battery power than they need to. That will extend the battery in the gimbal and allow us to use it more. We also don't want the motors overheating and the gimbal shutting down. Let me take you through the balancing process. At the minute, all of these axes are locked, and we're going to start off with a sequence that you want to follow when you balance this gimbal. The first axis we're going to balance is the tilt axis. You want to unlock this and just keep a handle on the camera so it doesn't fling around and damage itself. You can see now that this moves up and down. What we're aiming for here is that with this tilt axis unlocked, the camera just hangs out, chills out, and just points upwards without falling forwards or falling backwards or being top or bottom heavy. You can see at the minute it's wobbling and pointing to the front, so we need to make an adjustment. What we're going to do is we're going to unlock this and we're going to move this whole thing up and down this part of the gimbal, and this is going to allow us to balance the first part of the tilt axis. So I'm going to make sure I'm supporting the camera. I'm going to unlock this lever, and now I can move this whole thing up and down. If I move it too far this way, the camera's going to fall too far that way. And if I push this thing too far to the bottom, the camera's going to tip too far forwards. So it's just a question of sliding this thing around till you find that sweet spot. And now you can see that the camera is almost pointing straight up, so we have a tiny bit of an adjustment to make. And to help you out, this bar has some numbers on it just to take out a bit of the guesswork. Once the camera is pointing straight up and it's not wobbling to the front or the back, you can go and lock this lever. The second part of balancing the tilt axis is to point the camera forward and then check if it falls backwards or forwards. You can see at the minute, if I try and point this camera forwards, it's folding back on itself that way. To fix that, we can adjust where this bottom quick release plate is sitting. This is super easy because we've got that little dial on the quick release plate. Unlock this lever, and now you can twist this dial forwards and backwards to get the camera balanced. If it's falling too far backwards, then you're going to want to move the camera forwards, and if the camera's tilting too far forwards, you're going to want to twist this and move the camera back that way. And once you've found that sweet spot, make sure you lock this lever again. Now the camera should be able to sit vertically straight up like that without flopping forwards or backwards, and it should be able to sit front and back without tipping down and up. And as a final check, you should be able to point the camera 45 degrees up or 45 degrees down without it flopping forwards and backwards, and you can see this is pretty good. Let's move on to the next axis. You're going to want to lock this tilt axis because we've finished balancing that, and now this is locked in place and I can't move it. So the next axis is this roll axis. This is this one at the back here. I'll just turn you to face the camera. You're going to want to unlock this, but you're also going to want to make sure that you're holding onto the arm and the camera just so it doesn't fall down. So go and unlock that. And you can see that the camera's rotating downwards that way. And to fix this, we move this arm left or right until the camera stays level. To actually move this arm, you can unlock this lever here and then move this forwards and backwards. If I move it too far this way, the camera's now flopping down that side. And if I move this arm too far the other way, it's moving too far that way. So you just want to get this arm in the right place so the camera stays level, pointing straight ahead. Once you've done that, lock the adjustment arm and then lock that axis. The final axis we need to balance is the pan axis, and this is the one that connects onto the gimbal handle. We're going to unlock the pan axis by clicking this button, and you can see that it rotates around now. To balance this, we need to unlock this lever and push this arm forwards this way or backwards this way to get the thing balanced. To do this, I'm going to hold the bottom and I'm going to tilt the gimbal forwards. You can see that swinging around there. I'm going to bring this arm parallel to me, and then I'm going to slide this one forwards, making sure I've unlocked that front arm so it will actually slide. You can see it's falling to the front, so I need to pull it back a bit. back a bit more, tiny bit more forwards. You can see now it's staying in place even though I've got the gimbal tilted forwards and away from me. Once you've got it in place, lock the adjustment lever. Now if you unlock all of the other axes again, you should be able to point this gimbal more or less wherever you want, and it should stay roughly in place. The last step of the balancing process is to run something called auto tune, and this is where the gimbal checks the balancing and it also adjusts the stiffness of the motors in the gimbal to get the best possible result. So we've got all of these arms unlocked at the minute. I'm going to power on the gimbal by holding down that power button. And now we can go and perform the auto tune process. To start the auto tune process, what you need to do is hold in the M button, which is on the controller here. You want to hold that in at the same time as holding in the front trigger button. And when I do this, it's going to make some strange noises. We see we've got the calibration percentage on the screen there. And you can see this gimbal's wobbling about all over the place, so it looks a bit strange. You want to make sure that you do this on a solid flat surface, and also you don't want to move the gimbal around while this auto-tune calibration is happening. You can hear some strange noises there, that's fine. And now it says gimbal calibration is complete. Just tap confirm. If you swipe up from the bottom, and you can see that we've got this little green symbol here, and that's green, that's good. That tells us that this gimbal has been successfully balanced. Do you want to make your DJI RS 4 mini gimbal so much easier to use? If you do, then you're going to want to connect up your camera to the gimbal. This is going to let you operate the camera using the physical controls on the gimbal without having to touch the screen or the buttons on their camera, and you can control things like the focus, zooming in and out, starting and stopping recording, and even activate custom functions on the camera. There's two ways to connect your camera to your RS4 Mini: Bluetooth and a wired USB connection. I'm going to show you how to do both in this video and help you decide which method is best for you. Let's start off with the Bluetooth connection method, and to make this work, you're going to want to make a few changes to your camera settings. I'm going to be demonstrating with this Sony camera, and I'll also put some instructions on screen for a Canon camera if you're a Canon shooter, and I'll show you how to find the exact instructions for your camera if it's not a Sony or a Canon. The first thing you're going to want to do is make sure you're not connected via Bluetooth from your phone to the gimbal or your camera. So for example, on this Sony a7S III, we're going to head into the menu, come down to the network menu, head into Bluetooth, and make sure Bluetooth is turned on. Next, we'll go into pairing. Now the camera is waiting in Bluetooth pairing mode. We can go to the gimbal, power on the gimbal, slide up from the bottom to unlock, and then slide down from the top to enter the settings, tap on the Bluetooth icon, and then tap on camera. Tap confirm, and you should see your cameras show up. Here's the Sony a7S III, and I'm going to tap connect to connect to the camera. And you can see on the camera screen, it's asking us to confirm the pairing with the RS4 Mini. I'm going to tap OK. And now the camera is paired to the RS4 Mini. There's another setting we need to change on this Sony camera, and that's the Bluetooth remote control setting. We'll head down to there, and we need to turn Bluetooth remote control on. We can tap use paired device. If you want to be able to control the zoom settings, on a Sony camera you control the optical zoom if you've got a power zoom lens, but if you don't, you can control the digital zoom from the gimbal. To do that, we need to head into the zoom settings and switch this to digital zoom. And now we can use the controls on the gimbal to zoom in and out. We'll learn more about the controls in just a second. For a Canon camera, for example the EOS R6 Mark II, you'd follow these steps. Feel free to pause or screenshot, and next I'll show you how to connect using the USB cable. Oh, and by the way, after pairing your camera with your gimbal, you should power off the camera and gimbal and then power them both back on, and the Bluetooth should automatically reconnect. If it doesn't automatically connect, sometimes you might have to press the camera control button once to confirm the reconnection. The second method is to connect using the USB cable that came with your gimbal. Connect one end of the cable to the camera control port on the gimbal, and the other end of the cable to the USB port on your camera. On this Sony camera, you're going to want to select the Remote Shoot PC remote function. Once you've plugged in the cable and the screen comes up, click OK for that. You want to come back into the menu, come back to the network menu, choose Connect Remote Shutter, choose Smartphone Connection, and make sure that there's not a smartphone connected. If you want to use the gimbal to change focus, then you're going to want to set the physical lens switch to autofocus, and in the settings, set the camera focus mode to manual focus. For a Canon camera like the R6 Mark II, you'd follow these steps. I'll help you choose which of these two connection methods is best for you in just a second. Let's take a look first at how you can use the gimbal controls to operate the camera. To activate autofocus on the camera, half press the camera control button. To start recording a video, fully press the button in all the way, and to stop recording a video, press it all the way in again. If you want to control the zoom using the joystick on the gimbal, first set the joystick mode switch to zoom control, and then move this joystick up and down to zoom in or out. You can use the front dial to control focus. The M button by default will take a photo, but you can map this to trigger the C1 custom button action on a Sony camera or the function 1 button on a Nikon. To customize what this M button does, unlock the gimbal, slide up from the bottom, slide across to the left, press the M button option, and instead change this to custom function or function 1 button mode. Now when I press the M button on the gimbal, it's going to activate custom function 1 on my Sony a7S III, which I've set up to turn zebras on and off, but you could set it up to do other things too. Activating custom functions is only available when you're connected via Bluetooth and not using the USB cable. So which of these two methods is best for you? Depending on the camera you're using with this gimbal, you're going to get access to different features depending on which method you choose. You can see for the Sony a7S III, if pulling focus electronically is really important to you, then you'd need to use the USB connection method. But if I just wanted to start and stop recording using the gimbal camera control button, I could use either method. You can use the DJI Ronin compatibility checker, which I'll link to in the description. Just choose RS4 Mini and then choose the camera to see what method is best for you. Once you've chosen a camera, clicking on these buttons will also give you detailed connection instructions for your camera. Whether you're a new owner or just curious about the DJI RS4 tracking module, this video will help you get the most out of this thing fast. From setup and firmware updates to advanced ActiveTrack settings and creative controls, I'll show you how to unlock the full potential of your RS4 Mini. This is the RS4 Mini tracking module. On the front, you've got the tracking camera lens and indicator ring light, which changes color to show the current tracking status. On the back, there's a USB-C port for firmware updates, and underneath is the connection for the gimbal. You're definitely going to want to keep the firmware up to date on the tracking module to make sure it stays compatible with the gimbal, and also that you get any ActiveTrack updates or improvements. Head over to the DJI support page for the RS4 Mini or use the link in the description and download the latest firmware for the tracking module. To perform the update, plug the tracking module into a computer, and DJI recommends using the included USB-C cable for best results. Copy the firmware update file from your computer to the tracking module using USB, then disconnect and reconnect the module to the computer to start the update process. The module lights blink while it's updating, and make sure you don't disconnect the USB cable or turn off the computer during the update process. When the light stays solid red, it means the update is complete. You're also going to want to make sure your gimbal firmware is up to date using the Ronin app. To attach the tracking module, if the gimbal's turned on, make sure you turn it off first by holding in the power button. Align the tracking module's pin to the gimbal mount with the lens facing forward, and then lower until it snaps into place using the magnet and clips. The lens on the tracking module should be pointing forwards. Turn the gimbal back on. If this ring light doesn't turn on, you can see it's red at the minute, turn the gimbal back off, check that the module is lined up correctly, and then try again. Swipe up to unlock the gimbal screen, and then swipe right to open up the ActiveTrack settings. If you swipe right and it says no video input, that means the module isn't connected properly and you should try again. Oh, and by the way, the tracking module will go to sleep after 5 minutes. If it does go to sleep, just press the gimbal trigger button to wake it up. Once you've got the tracking module installed, there's two ways to start and stop ActiveTrack. The first is to use the gimbal controls. To start ActiveTrack, press the gimbal trigger once, and then it will locate the subject. And then if I move around in the frame, you can see that ActiveTrack is tracking me now. To stop ActiveTrack, press the gimbal trigger once again. We'll start it again, and once ActiveTrack is active, if you double press the trigger button, it will disable ActiveTrack and it will recenter the gimbal. The second way is to start and stop ActiveTrack using a really cool feature, and that's gesture control. You need to be between 1 and 3 meters away from the gimbal to use gesture control. I'm going to hold up my hand in a palm gesture, and now ActiveTrack is tracking me, and I can move around in the scene. And to stop tracking, use the same palm gesture again. And now you can see ActiveTrack is no longer tracking me. The color of this ring light indicates the ActiveTrack status. It's currently red. Red means that ActiveTrack is turned off or that the tracking has been lost. Just going to activate ActiveTrack. Now the light goes green. Green means that ActiveTrack is currently active and tracking the subject. If I duck down here, and if the light flashes green, it means you've got a temporary loss of tracking, which might come back if you come back into the frame. Once you've enabled ActiveTrack, you can customize where you appear in the frame to give you extra creative control. So let's go and start ActiveTrack. And the first way you can customize your framing is to use the joystick on the gimbal. So you can move the joystick up, down, left, and right, and you can see on this screen that it's only going to allow me to adjust the framing within the bounds of the lens and what it can currently track. So if I wanted to, I could place myself over to this side of the frame. And now when I move around using ActiveTrack, you can see that I'm not in the center of the frame, I'm over to this side. The second way that you can control your composition when using ActiveTrack is to use a different gesture. So what we'll do is we'll just stand back a bit and we'll start ActiveTrack and then use this gesture to pause ActiveTrack. On the ActiveTrack ring light, it's going yellow now, and this is telling us that ActiveTrack is paused. And now what I can do is, the gimbal's not going to move, I can walk around the frame. So say I want it to be on this side of the frame, and then use this gesture again to resume ActiveTrack tracking. ActiveTrack is tracking again because the ring light is green, and now if I move around, it's going to start ActiveTrack again, but this time I'm on this side of the frame, whereas before I was over there. Another way you can customize how ActiveTrack works is to change the follow modes on the gimbal. The gimbal's currently in pan, tilt, follow mode. I'm going to start ActiveTrack with the gesture, and you can see the gimbal is following me left and right using the panning, and it's also tilting up and down to follow me around. I'm going to change the gimbal follow mode to pan follow mode, and it's still following me left and right, as you can see, but now when I move up and down, it's not tracking me up and down. It's only going to track my movement left to right, which just gives you a bit more control if you don't want that wobbling up and down. Oh, and you can't use ActiveTrack in FPV mode. To further customize ActiveTrack, you can slide right to access the ActiveTrack screen. The first option is composition. If you tap that, it's going to give you two different options. And this is what happens when ActiveTrack is first activated. By default, it's set to center tracking subject, and that means that when you activate ActiveTrack, it's going to search for the person and then center that person in the frame. If you change this to keep current framing, when you activate ActiveTrack, wherever the person is relative to that frame, it's going to keep that framing. This can save time if you already want to set up your composition and you don't want to go and modify the composition using the joystick or pausing ActiveTrack with that gesture. You can change the ActiveTrack speed. Slow mode is ideal for smooth, gentle tracking when your subject is moving slowly or remaining relatively still, like an interview or a vlog. Medium mode is a balanced option for general use, ideal when your subject is moving steadily or parallel to the gimbal. And fast mode is designed for high-speed action shots, rapid movements, or more dynamic scenes. This mode can feel more energetic or jerky if that's the look you want. If you find that the ring light is distracting or it annoys you or reflects off something in the scene, you can disable the ring light on the tracking module, but normally it's pretty handy to have that on. And finally, you can take control of the gestures that we just saw. You can change the actual gesture that starts and stops tracking, and also for the start and stop capturing. Or if you want to turn a gesture off, tap on it and then toggle this top switch. And now I can't use this gesture with the tracking module. Here's a few ActiveTrack tips and limitations for you. DJI state that for best results, you should avoid backlit situations and also low light situations. You want to stay between 0.5 meter and 10 meters away from the gimbal when you're using ActiveTrack. You can use the gestures anywhere between 1 to 3 meters away from the gimbal. And during active tracking, if the subject does drift away from where you want them in the frame, you can use the joystick just to bring them back to where you want them. The tracking module at the moment only tracks people, and if there's multiple people in the frame, it's going to prioritize people closer to the tracking module and closer to the center of the frame. If your gimbal footage isn't as smooth or cinematic as you hoped, it might not be your gimbal skills, it might just be that you need to tweak a few settings. We're going to cover the must-know DJI RS4 Mini settings that will transform your footage, including a secret hidden screen that most people miss. By the end of this video, you'll know the settings to perfect your gimbal game and get pro shots every time. Once you've powered on the gimbal, swipe up. This is the home screen. You can tap on the top left icon to go into the auto-tune settings, and if you want to, you can tap start calibration, and that will fine-tune the gimbal depending on your payload, assuming it's already balanced. And if you tap on these things, you can adjust the stiffness of individual motors in the gimbal to get the best results if you want to fine-tune things manually. The top right icon indicates the gimbal balancing status, and you can see this is green. That means everything's balanced and ready to go. The bottom left tells you what follow mode you're in. It's in PTF or pan tilt follow mode. There's a switch on the side of the gimbal, and you can change this to pan follow mode or FPV mode. The bottom right button allows you to adjust the follow speed and sensitivity. This is split into two different types of mode. You've got smooth and responsive. The smooth mode follows the Ronin series of gimbals, and it gives you that nice soft smooth start and end to gimbal movements, whereas the responsive mode, the gimbal's going to respond more quickly when you move it around, but you could get slightly more jerky start and stop movements. If we head back to smooth mode, you've got 4 different choices: slow, medium, fast and custom. These settings determine how quickly the gimbal responds to your hand movements. If your subject is moving really slow and you want really nice, smooth flowing footage, then you want to use the slow mode. But if you're trying to track a faster moving subject and there's a lot of movement around, you might want to set medium or fast. For the ultimate control, slide all the way across to the end here to this custom mode and tap at the top right to start entering custom values. You can make the gimbal really slow to respond by setting a value of 1. Or you can max it out to 100 if you want to get the most responsiveness out of the smooth mode. I'm just going to change that back to medium, which is a good general purpose starting point. But if you want the maximum responsiveness and you're tracking really fast moving things, you can switch this to responsive mode and then choose either fast, or again, go into the custom setting and choose the custom amount that's going to match the movement in your subject. So you might have to do a bit of trial and error on this depending on what you're filming. Just going to set that back to smooth and medium. Tap at the top left to go back. The next thing we're going to look at is the control center. To access the control center, slide down from the top of the screen. Tap the top left icon to go into the display settings, and this determines what happens on the actual gimbal display. You can automatically lock the display after a certain amount of time, from 2 minutes, 1 minute, 30 seconds, or if you don't want that screen to ever automatically lock, set it to off. And while the screen is locked, you can choose how bright or how dim it is. So if you're filming in an environment where you might not want that screen showing up on a reflection of something, then you can drop that brightness right down. On the top right, you've got the Bluetooth settings, and I've got a dedicated video on how to connect your camera to this gimbal, so I'm not going to go into this here, but basically you can choose to connect to the camera or your mobile phone using Bluetooth. The bottom left setting turns on or off silent mode, and when silent mode is turned on, the gimbal's not going to make any beeping noises, so when you turn the gimbal on, you get that beep. If you turn silent mode on, you're not going to get any of those beeps, and you might want that if you're filming in a situation where you don't want to disrupt the subject that you're filming. At the bottom right, we've got the system settings. So I'm going to tap on this little nut, and we've got quite a few options to go through here. The first is the ability to disable the selfie mode. I can triple tap the front trigger, and now the gimbal is going to switch and look backwards or into selfie mode. You might not want that accidentally turning on if you're in the middle of filming something and you're using the trigger for something else. So if I turn that on to disable selfie mode, if I do a triple tap now, you can see the gimbal is not being turned into selfie mode. Unless you actually want to use selfie mode, I would recommend having that disabled all the time. It's just going to prevent any weird problems or mistakes during filming. The next mode you can turn on is this orbit follow mode, and this is supposed to create even smoother movements if you're doing arc movements or orbit movements around a subject. There aren't many technical details about what this feature actually does, but as far as I'm aware, I believe it alters the deadband. Next up, we've got the auto lock section. This determines what happens when you power off the gimbal, whether it's automatically going to lock those axes. If we go into the on-off submenu, we can either perform no auto locking when we power off the gimbal. So if I power off now, the gimbal just powers off, and you can see none of these axes are automatically locked. Let's just power it back on. And if we go back into auto lock, You can also recenter and lock the gimbal, or fold the gimbal up and auto lock the axes like this. You can see how it folds up, and now all of these axes are locked. So this is a great option if you're storing it or putting it in a backpack or something and you get it out, use it quickly, turn it off. You're probably going to want it in this mode so it's easy to put back in a backpack. The other auto lock options are the sleep mode options, and this is what happens when you put the gimbal into sleep mode. You can either choose recenter and lock, or if you switch this to none, when the gimbal goes into sleep mode, it's not going to lock the gimbal. I'm just going to change that back to recenter and lock, but if you've got a shot set up or you don't want that automatic locking, you can turn that off. All right, next up, we've got push mode. This allows you to turn on push mode for the pan or tilt axes. Normally, when the gimbal's on and it's balanced and you've got a camera on it, you're not gonna want to try and push or move the gimbal because the motors are fighting against you, and that's the whole point. It's trying to stabilize the camera. If I turn on push pan mode, I can now manually, by hand, move this pan axis. If I turn on tilt, I can now manually tilt forwards and backwards. You might want that if you want to manually line up a shot for the start of a movement, for example, or you could just use the joystick. Next up, we've got horizontal calibration. If you find that during filming the horizon is kind of tilted left or right a bit, you can tap on horizontal calibration, and as you can see now, it's doing an automatic calibration to try and bring that horizon back to level. And you can see calibration is complete, tap confirm. If you find that the horizon is still out, you can tap tune manually, and then you can adjust and move it left and right to try and get that horizon perfectly level. If you think you've got a problem with your gimbal, you can tap gimbal auto check and tap confirm, and it's going to run some automatic diagnostics and checks on the gimbal and tell you whether the gimbal is operating properly. You can see it's moving the gimbal around and checking everything's okay. And you can see here that this gimbal status is all good. Tap confirm. If you want to automatically power off the gimbal after 10 minutes of being locked and inactive, you can turn on the auto power off mode if you want to save battery power. And if you want to restore the settings, you can restore the gimbal parameters back to their defaults. I'm just going to tip cancel, and you can also restore the original Bluetooth password. You can also change the language of the gimbal, get device information such as serial number, check out what the firmware of the gimbal is at the minute, and view compliance information. Okay, let's tap back to get to the settings and then swipe up to get back to the home screen. Let's take a look next at the gimbal settings. To access the gimbal settings, slide up from the bottom. The first thing you can change is the joystick speed. If you tap on this, you can set this to slow, medium, fast, or even custom. And what this setting does is it just affects how quickly the joystick responds to movements. This is medium, this is fast. And if we head into the custom mode and tap at the top right, let's max this out. And you can see when I press the joystick now, it's super responsive to the joystick. I'm going to set this back to medium. You might want to use slow joystick speeds if you really want to fine tune a shot, or if you're using the joystick during a movement, you don't want it to seem too jerky and you want it to be as smooth as possible. As well as controlling how fast the gimbal moves when you use the joystick, you can also set the joystick smoothness by tapping at the top right. And this affects how smooth it is. The higher this is, the more smooth it is. Let's have a look at it on low, and basically when I stop moving the joystick, the camera and gimbal kind of just stops. If we set this joystick smoothness to the high setting, and when I move the joystick, when I stop moving the joystick, the gimbal continues to move and slow down. And you've also got a custom mode for this too. I'm just going to set this to medium, and if you don't really use the joystick, then this is not really relevant. Next up, we can control the dial function by tapping at the bottom left here. If you've got a camera connected and it supports focusing, you can use the dial on the front of the gimbal to adjust focus. You can also adjust the camera's ISO, aperture, shutter speed, or if you want to control the roll axis of the gimbal using the front dial, you can do that. Change it to pan. Now you can change the pan with the front dial, or you can adjust the tilt with the dial. Let's head back. If you tap on dial settings at the bottom right, you get to customize how that dial responds. So the dial speed, as its name suggests, allows you to customize how quickly the dial responds. Let's put this to 100, and we'll come back and I'll switch the dial function to pan. And we'll head back into dial settings and just make sure that dial speed is on 100. Now, when I use the front dial. It's pretty quick and responsive. I don't have to move that dial much to create the effect. But if I change this dial speed all the way down, something really low, like 3, now when I move that dial, I really have to move it a long way to get it to affect whatever setting we've chosen. And if you want to, you can reverse that dial. I'm just going to set this back to 50. Let's get into that hidden screen. You can see at the minute, we don't really have any indication on the screen that there's anything more we can do here, but you can actually slide across from the right to access these 2 hidden settings. The first setting allows us to customize what the physical M button does on the gimbal. By default, this is set to take photos. So if you've got your camera connected, you can just press the M button and the camera will take a photo. But if you've got the camera connected correctly to the gimbal, you can set this to custom button mapping. And what this will do on a Sony camera, if you've got custom button 1 set up to perform some custom action, like turning on and off zebras, for example, you can use the M button to activate that custom function on the camera. You can also do this on a Nikon camera with function button 1. And this can be super handy, especially if you're using this gimbal purely for video and you never want to take photos with it. So I'm going to leave it on this setting. Let's go back, and the second hidden setting is this press and hold trigger setting. When you press in and hold the trigger, by default, it's going to lock the gimbal. You can see how it's not following my movements, it's just pointing straight ahead, and that's because I've got the trigger held in. But you can customize this, and instead of gimbal lock, you can choose to enter FPV mode whenever you hold in the trigger. And what that enables you to do is it means that you can use one of the other follow modes, like pan, tilt, follow. So you can see that this is responding to my movements. So if you're filming something and you just want pan, tilt, follow to be the main movement, but then just for some special effects or at some special times, you can hold in that front trigger button and then go straight into FPV mode. I think most of the time it makes sense to have this in gimbal lock mode, unless you're doing some kind of specialist shoot. Let's go back, and then we can slide across back to the normal menu, slide down to get back to the home screen. If you've got the tracking module fitted, you can slide left to access the ActiveTrack settings. I've got an entire video on how to set up ActiveTrack with this thing, so I'm not going to go into details here on that. It just lets you customize the composition and the framing and the behavior of the active tracking. What if I told you that you'd wasted your money on your DJI RS4 Mini unless you're using the Ronin app to give you full creative control, because there's things you can do in the app that you just can't do with the gimbal alone. Let me show you 3 creative things you can do with this app that's going to expand the possibilities for what you can create with this gimbal. Let's go and fire up the Ronin app and connect to the gimbal, and then tap on the big create button. This is going to give you access to those creative options. The first thing we're going to look at is manual control using the virtual on-screen joystick. So tap at the top left to open up the virtual joystick. You've got a couple of options here. You've got speed options and smoothness options. You can tap recenter to recenter the gimbal, and then you can use this on-screen joystick to move the gimbal around. Hold down your finger in the middle, move it left and right to pan, and up and down to tilt, and anywhere in between. You can use this slider and slide it left or right to alter the roll. Tap the big red button at the bottom to start recording on the camera, and if I turn this around, there we are. You can use the speed settings to control how fast the gimbal's going to move around in response to the virtual joystick. If I lower these sliders around, see the gimbal, even if I move my finger all the way to the edge, it's moving really slowly now. Or if you max these things out, it gets pretty crazy, so you're going to want to take care with this. Whoa. And you can tap recenter if things get too out of control. Reduce those down to about 20-ish. That gives you a nice, smooth, slow control. So if you want the gimbal to move faster, you can increase these things a bit, but then you can come over to the smoothness settings. And if you increase these smoothness settings, and you can do it for each of the axes here, pan, tilt, and roll. Now when I move things about, if I let go, the gimbal keeps moving around and it comes to that nice, smooth, slow stop. So even though we've increased the speed, we can now get nice, smooth movements. So why might you want to use this virtual joystick? Well, the most obvious one is if you need to control the gimbal remotely. Maybe you're recording something and you've got it set up on a tripod or something on stage and you need to be able to reframe and start and stop recording. You can do that. But if you want to create repeatable movements, that's where the second awesome creative option comes in. I'm going to tap at the top left to go back to the create screen. And this time we're going to tap on the track option. The track option allows you to add keyframes to the gimbal's movement and then replay those keyframe actions. That means you can program up to 10 points or 10 keyframes in this gimbal. There's a couple of cool things about this. So I'm going to go and just reset this and delete all of the keyframes. So let's say that we wanted this gimbal to be filming the studio and we want it to be able to recreate the movement for some repeatable movement. Say you've got actors walking through the scene or people walking through the scene. Maybe you're filming product B-roll and you want to be able to recreate the shot maybe with different lighting. There's so many creative options. Let me show you how to use it. The little yellow camera on the screen shows you where the gimbal is currently pointing. You can see it's pointing down and to the left. You can tap on the bottom right to open up this on-screen joystick. And unfortunately, this can move a bit fast sometimes. Let's set up a shot where it's going to look down at the start. You can tap plus to add that as a keyframe, and you can see we've got a number 1 now, and that's going to be the start of the movement. Let's say we want to start by panning to the right and then by panning up. I'm using these on-screen joysticks, but it can be quite twitchy and it can be quite difficult to get the camera pointing exactly where you want it. That's where this awesome feature comes in handy. I'm going to tap on the bottom right to turn off the on-screen joystick, and instead I'm going to tap push mode until it turns enabled and turns white. Now, push mode means you can actually move the gimbal around without it fighting you and trying to correct the orientation or the stability. Don't try and push the gimbal around unless you've turned push mode on, because you could damage the motors. Now, with push mode turned on, you can manually adjust the pan axis without the gimbal fighting you, and you can also adjust the tilt axis up and down like this. But don't try and adjust that roll axis because the gimbal is going to fight you on that and you could damage it. So just manually push the pan and tilt axis. So doing this, it's going to be a lot easier for me to line up that air conditioner unit in the center of the frame. Just going to start recording on my camera so you can see, and I can push this tilt up and down because I've got push mode enabled, and we can adjust the pan, and it's just a lot easier than trying to use that on-screen joystick. Now we're looking at the second point. We can tap the plus symbol, and now we've got 2 waypoints. You can see the number 2 here, and you can see we've got this line between the 1 and 2. The yellow camera is covering up the number 2. Still got push mode enabled. After that, we want to maybe look down at this desk light, and then we'll tap plus to add a third keyframe or waypoint. Just going to disable push mode by tapping on it. Now you've set up your keyframes, you can go and tweak them to get the desired effect that you want. Tap on a keyframe, and when you tap on the first one, you can see the movement duration is actually grayed out. And when you tap on any of these keyframes, the camera's going to move to that keyframe that you've already programmed. I'm going to tap on the first one, and then you've got this stay time. Stay time is how long the gimbal is going to stay in that gimbal location or that gimbal direction for that keyframe. So I'm just going to leave this at 2 seconds because that's just going to give us a couple of seconds for the camera to be able to start recording before the movement happens. I'm going to tap on keyframe 2, and now we've got access to the movement duration or stay time. Movement duration is how long it takes to go from the last keyframe to this keyframe. So let's set this up for 5 seconds of movement. Perhaps we want to stay there for 5 seconds, and then keyframe 3, let's make this movement duration really quick. You can see we can make this as low as 1 second, so it's really going to swing around to position 3, and then let's say we're just going to stay at position 3 for 5 seconds. Tap preview, and it's still going to move through all of those keyframes, but you're not previewing those movement times and stay times. Tap the record button at the bottom. It's going to enable recording on the camera and then move through those keyframes. So it's moved to the first keyframe. It's staying there for 2 seconds. Then we've got that 5 seconds was it moved to keyframe number 2, and then it's staying at keyframe number 2 for that stay time, and then it's very quickly moving to keyframe 3 with that 1 second move, and then the movement is finished and the recording has stopped. You can get quick access to the camera settings by tapping this camera icon at the top and then changing the settings if you want to. The third creative option is kind of like a bit of a gimmick in my opinion, but you might find it useful sometimes, and that's another remote control option called Force Mobile, and this makes for good YouTube demos. This lets you move the phone around and control the gimbal. So as before, you can change speed and smoothness. I've got smoothness set to 0, so hopefully this doesn't make you seasick. Tap Enable Force Mobile, and then you can just move the phone around, tilt the phone up and down, left and right to control the camera, and you can change the speed if you want to maybe not make it so jerky and seasickness inducing. There you go. And also you can alter the smoothness, which kind of helps at these higher speeds. When I stop moving the phone, the gimbal just comes to a nice hold. Just recenter, and if you want to, you can turn off the tilt by setting this to 0. Now I can control the panning, but I can't control the tilting. But it's probably the roll axis that you're going to want to turn off, just so you at least keep the horizon fairly level. Hi there, if the RS4 Mini is your first ever gimbal, you might be feeling a bit overwhelmed or a bit confused about all of the jargon when it comes to gimbals, but don't worry, this video is going to assume that you've got no previous gimbal knowledge. We're going to be breaking things down, talking about the moving parts so you can really get the most out of your investment. And ultimately, you're buying a gimbal because you want to get footage that's as smooth as melted butter in a non-stick pan listening to Barry White. I've already got a super detailed video on how to install a camera, balance the gimbal and connect the gimbal to the camera, so I'm not going to be repeating that in this video, but I will include a link to that video in the description. Let's start off by looking at the 3 different axes that make up 3-axis stabilization on a gimbal. Now ordinarily on this RS4 Mini, when you turn it on, it's going to automatically unlock the axes. You can see at the minute that they're all locked, so none of them are moving around. I'm not going to power on the gimbal, I'm going to manually unlock these axes just so I can demonstrate what's going to be happening. Normally when the gimbal's powered on, you're not going to want to try and move these things around because you could damage the gimbal. The first axis is called the pan axis, and this is the thing that moves the gimbal left and right. You can see it's attached to the main handle of the gimbal body. So anytime you see pan axis or pan motor, we're referring to this movement here. The next axis is the roll axis, and this is the thing at the back here that rolls the camera and effectively controls the horizon when you're holding the gimbal upright. The third axis is the tilt axis, and this is the thing that moves the camera up when you want to look up and moves the camera down when you want to move down. It's important to know the names of these 3 different axes because when you come to modify settings, you're going to need to know what you're actually modifying. The next most important thing, and the thing that can be confusing at first, is to understand the different gimbal follow modes. So I'm going to hold in the power button and we'll get this thing powered on. On the side of this gimbal you've got this switch, and this allows you to switch between the 3 main follow modes. You can see here we've got PTF, PF and FPV modes. We're going to look at each of these 3 in turn. When the gimbal screen is locked, it tells us what mode we're in, and you can see we're in PTF mode. If I go and modify the switch, you can change to FPV, PF and back to PTF. So you always know what follow mode you're in. Let's start off by looking at pan follow mode, which is what PF stands for. In pan follow mode, the gimbal is going to respond to movements left and right, but you can see if I switch over to the camera's view, as I'm moving the gimbal left and right, the horizon is staying level. If I tilt the gimbal this way and this way, or this way and this way, the camera is always staying upright and level. So the pan follow mode is ideal for left to right or right to left movements where you want to keep the horizon level. You can use it when you're orbiting or circling around a subject, or you want to follow a moving subject in the frame. So essentially the pan axis can move around, but the tilt and the roll axis maintain the position of the camera. All right, let's switch over to PTF mode, or pan tilt follow mode. So in this mode, both the pan axis can move around, but also the tilt axis can move around. So whereas before in pan follow mode, the camera didn't tilt up and down, that horizon always stayed in the same place. As I move the gimbal or tilt the gimbal forward, the camera points forward to look down, and if I tilt the gimbal up, the camera tilts upward to look up. So in this mode, the pan axis motor can move around and the tilt axis motor can move up and down, but the roll axis motor is being used to stabilize the footage so we don't end up tilting our horizons. You can use pan tilt follow mode where you want to look up and down and left and right, and you want to be able to have those diagonal movements. So for example, you might want to use this mode if you're following a person and then you want to tilt up to show their face, or you can use this mode to do reveal shots. For example, say I wanted to reveal this studio, I could start off tilted down like this and then move forward and tilt the gimbal up to reveal the rest of the studio. Let's switch the gimbal over to the third main follow mode, which is FPV mode, or first person view mode. In this mode, all three axes will respond to the movement of the gimbal. Let me show you what this looks like. Before we had tilting and we had panning, but this time if I tilt the gimbal to the side, we can get the camera to effectively make the horizon no longer level. So you can use these kinds of shots for really dynamic, strange first-person views where you can tilt, bring the camera around, and then level out the camera. You probably won't use FPV mode as much as you'll use pan follow and pan tilt follow modes, but you can use it to get highly dynamic, highly creative, highly energetic shots when you need them. I'm going to switch back to pan tilt follow mode, and here's a quick tip for you. You can double click the joystick to recenter the gimbal. And I want to show you a fourth mode, and that's locked mode. If you press the front joystick and hold it in, the gimbal is going to enter what's called locked mode. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to tilt the handle to the left and tilt the handle to the right. You can see the camera is staying dead straight forward. I'm going to tilt it down and tilt it up. The camera's still staying forwards. If I move my body this way, the camera's still pointing that way. And one use for this is if you want to walk sideways, but keep the camera pointing that way, you can keep your finger held on the trigger. And it doesn't matter which way I move my body, the camera is always going to be looking at that part of the studio. So you might want to use lock mode for situations where you want the most stable, steady shot. Maybe you're trying to film a static shot of a building or an object like a car or something, and you just want the camera to be locked onto that subject. You can also create custom follow modes. To do this, you need to change the switch on the side to FPV mode and then tap on the bottom left where it says FPV. You can also select the specialist 3D roll function, but if you slide across, you can come over to custom and then tap on the top right little pencil icon to customize which of the axes will actually be locked and which ones will follow the gimbal movement. If I turn off all of them, then the gimbal is not going to follow any movements. And you can see here, this is kind of a similar thing to locked on mode. That's because none of the axes of the gimbal are following the gimbal movements. So if you wanted to, you could just turn on tilt follow mode. So basically this mode, if I just center the gimbal, allows you, or this custom mode I should say, allows you to tilt up and down, but it's always going to be trying to face the camera the same way to the front. So using these custom modes gives you a lot of extra flexibility when you're trying to set up the shot that you want. Just going to switch this back to pan tilt follow mode. So now we understand the follow modes, the next important thing to understand is that we can customize the reactivity of the gimbal when we're in these modes. And you can do this to really fine-tune how the gimbal responds to the situation you're filming. Let me show you how to do this in the settings. If your gimbal screen is locked, swipe up to unlock it and then tap on the bottom right to access the follow speed and smoothness settings. So you can choose between slow, medium, fast, and also custom. And there's also two separate modes. You've got smooth mode and responsive mode. Smooth mode allows you to get that really nice butter and Barry White effect, if that's even a thing. So you're going to have those really nice cinematic movements, but if you're following something that's moving a bit more fast and you want the gimbal to respond more quickly to your movements, then you can choose responsive mode. But in these two modes, you've also got the slow, medium and fast settings. If you want to, you can even customize this further by changing to custom and tapping at the top right and then choosing a custom follow speed. I'm going to set this to 100 and you can see as I move the gimbal around now, it's reacting really quickly to my movements. And if we amp this up even more by changing over to responsive mode, we're already on 100. Now the gimbal, as you can see, is moving really fast to my gimbal movements, even at the expense of a little bit of smoothness. But that's what you want if your most important thing is to keep the thing you're filming in frame and it's moving fast. I'm just going to change this back to medium and smooth, which is a good general purpose mode to start with. All right, let's move on now to the physical controls on the RS4 Mini gimbal. We've already seen the power button and the follow mode selector switch, so I won't be going into those again. You've got this red button. This is the camera control button. You can half press this to initiate autofocus on the camera. You can press it all the way in to start recording video, and you can press it all the way in again to stop recording video. And if you hold this button in, you can ask the camera to take a photo. Next up, we've got this M button, and by default, if you press this once, it's going to tell the camera to take a photo, but you can modify this so it activates custom function 1 on your camera if you want that. And you can press this button in and hold it if you want to access sport mode. And in sport mode, the follow speed of the gimbal will increase if you need to track fast moving subjects. The next control is this joystick, and you can change what this joystick does by switching this switch here. When this switch is at the bottom, this is going to allow you to move the gimbal around using the joystick. You control the tilt and the pan axes. And if you switch this switch up to the top, you can now use the up and down functions on the joystick to zoom in and out on your camera if you've got your camera set up to perform that action. All right, next up, we've got the trigger at the front. We already talked about lock mode, so if you hold this trigger button in, the gimbal will enter lock mode, and when you release it, lock mode will disable. If you want to recenter the gimbal, double press the trigger, then it will recenter and point forwards. And if you've not got selfie mode disabled, which I have, if you did a triple press, the gimbal is going to turn around and look backwards if you're using it in a selfie situation. I like to have this turned off because I don't want to accidentally initiate selfie mode in the middle of a video recording. We've also got this front dial here, and you can customize what this front dial does. I've got an entire video on how to change the settings in this gimbal, so I'm not going to go into that here. At the minute, I've just got it set up to control the pan axis, but you can set it to do things like focus or change camera settings. I'll put a link to that settings video in this description. All right, let's talk next about the different operation modes or handling modes of this gimbal. The first and most common one you see is this mode where you're holding the gimbal, and at the minute I've got the tripod extension handle fitted to this gimbal, and I highly recommend that you have this fitted. Not only does it make it really easy to put the gimbal down without it falling over, but it gives you a lot bigger area to hold this gimbal. So this first mode is called upright mode, or you might have heard it called lollipop mode. And this is a basic general purpose handling mode. So you could use this if you're filming walking or running shots of a subject. The next operation mode is underslung mode, and this is where you're going to have the handle pointing upright and you're holding the gimbal so the camera is underslung. Now there's a couple of things to be careful of here. You want to be really careful that this axis doesn't hit the lens of the camera. You can see on this 20mm lens, it's pretty close. And you also want to make sure, even if it's not going to hit the lens, that you don't accidentally get the gimbal in the shot. And this mode is great if you want to do low to the ground movements. And that can really emphasize a sense of speed if you're tracking things low to the ground, because the ground's rushing past the lens really quickly. The next mode is flashlight mode, and this is simply where you hold the gimbal pointing straight out. And again, this is where this extra handle really comes in handy, no pun intended, because it gives you a lot more stability and it gives you 2 points to hold this gimbal. And you can use this mode if you're in really tight spaces, say you're following someone down a tunnel or something like that. It also means you can get closer to subjects if you want to pass by them. So if I'm just passing by this table, I can get a lot closer to this table than I could in normal upright mode. The next operating mode is briefcase mode, and for this you're going to need the handle that fits on the RS4 Mini. Once you've fitted the handle, you can adjust the orientation of this handle, and then you can use it in this briefcase mode, which makes handling it a lot more comfortable. And this makes shooting low down footage a lot more comfortable because, as you can see here, just holding the briefcase handle like I would hold a briefcase, if anyone even used briefcases these days, it's a lot more intuitive. And if you want to, you can still hold the handle to create an even more secure hold and also distribute some of the weight from one hand onto 2 hands. When using the briefcase handle, just make sure that you don't adjust this in such a way as it's going to hit the roll motor. If you're a solo shooter, then you already know the grind. You're the camera operator, you're the subject in the video, and you're the director. And without anyone to help you, getting creative results can feel frustrating and slow. But the DJI RS4 Mini can be your secret weapon if you know how to use it right. If you want to feel capable and in control when you're filming solo, want your videos to look pro without any help, want to waste less time and create more, and want to feel like your gear is working for you, not against you, then these 10 essential tips will help you film faster, smoother, and more creatively. The first 3 tips are going to be really essential for helping you get set up quickly when you're filming all by yourself. The first thing you're definitely going to want to do, especially if you shoot most of the time with the same camera and lens combination, is to pre-balance your camera on the RS4 Mini before you even leave the house. You can leave the quick release plate on the camera, and then as soon as you get out into the field, grab the gimbal and then just slide it onto the upper quick release plate, tighten it up, and then you're ready to film without any nonsense trying to balance the gimbal out in the field. Number 2, you're going to want to install the Ronin app on your phone and pair your phone with your gimbal. Make sure it's all working before you leave the house. That's because you're going to need this for some creative features that I'll show you later in the video, like adding pre-programmed keyframes. The last thing you want is to be trying to install the app when you're out and about. Tip 3 is about how you actually use the gimbal out in the field. So you can use the little handle extension, which is also a tripod. Tip 3 is to actually do something a bit different. Instead of using a tripod extension handle, mount a quick release plate to the bottom of the gimbal. Once you've done that, it means you can attach the RS4 Mini to a full-size tripod, which is going to give you loads of creative options, especially when you're filming yourself. So now we've got those quick setup tips out of the way, let's get into the first of the creative shots that we're going to look at for solo shooters. I've got 7 creative ideas coming for you next, and the first one is the most obvious, so we'll just get it out of the way. For this, I'd recommend leaving the little collapsible tripod extension handle on. It's going to make this first shot so much easier to get. Just hold the gimbal out in front of you and walk. This is great for vlog style moments or walking, talking shots to the camera like this. When you're doing this kind of shot, I'd highly recommend that you set the gimbal follow mode to pan follow or PF. That means it's going to try and keep the horizons level and it's not going to be tilting up and down while you're walking. The next creative shot is the POV or point of view glide. Rather than facing the camera towards you, simply spin it round to face forward and then just film where you're going as if it's being viewed through your own eyes. This kind of shot is great for immersive feeling B-roll on location and first person sequences where you really want to bring the viewer into the thing that they're watching. Next up, we've got the walk by with ActiveTrack shot. You can see how handy that tripod mount is on the gimbal. I've just fitted it to this tripod and this makes it so much easier. It also gives you a different range of heights that you can film this shot with to get different creative results. To get this to work, you're going to need the tracking module installed on the RS4 Mini, and then just stand in the scene, hold up your hand to start tracking. Now we've got ActiveTrack active, and then simply walk through the scene. In this case, we're not looking directly at the camera. It's going to take the place of a camera operator following us. So let's start over here and then just casually walk around the car. Normally for this shot, you're going to want the gimbal set to pan follow mode because it's going to keep that horizon nice and level. But if you want to get extra creative, you can set it to pan tilt follow mode. Then the gimbal's going to look up and down as it tracks you around the scene. Next up, we've got the talking, walk and track. For this shot, once again, we're going to be making use of ActiveTrack. So I'll just go and start it using that hand gesture. But unlike the last one, we're actually going to be talking directly to the camera and not ignoring it. And it's almost like having a camera operator slowly following you around. Just creates a more dynamic, interesting looking shot. Things get even more interesting when you fire up the Ronin app. So in the app, you can tap on the create button and this gives you loads of creative choices. The one we're going to be using in this case is the track feature. I'm going to tap track, and if you don't have a cable connected, then you won't be able to automatically start and stop recording on the camera. But if you haven't got that set up, don't worry, just tap OK. Basically what track mode is it allows you to set up predefined keyframes or key points, and then the gimbal is going to move through that range of motion. So if you're filming yourself, you can create nice cinematic pans of where you are without needing a camera operator or someone else to help you. Let's go and get this set up. The easiest way is to tap push mode to enable push mode, and then you can just manually move the gimbal around. And because push mode is enabled, it means I can actually move it around with the hand without the gimbal fighting me. You don't want to try and move the gimbal unless you've got push mode enabled, otherwise you could damage it. Start it about there. Then in the app, tap the plus button to add a waypoint, and now we can go move the gimbal to where we want it to finish. In this case, I'm just panning, but you could also tilt as well. So I'm just going to pan to the other side of that road, tap plus to enter that second waypoint. And what you can do now is tap on waypoint number 2, and you can decide how long it's going to take to do that panning movement. We're probably going to want a reasonable time. If it's too quick, it's not going to look very, quote, cinematic. So we'll start with 10 seconds. On the first keyframe, I'm going to change the stay time to about 10 seconds. And what that's going to mean is it's going to stay at keyframe 1 when I tap to actually start the movement. That's just going to give me time to get around in the frame. All right, let's do this. I'm going to hit record on the camera, and then I'm going to tap the record button. But remember, we haven't got that cable connected, so it's not actually going to start recording on the camera. And it's going to count down, and then it's going to start moving. We could have probably changed that movement duration to a bit longer than 10 seconds because it was a little bit quick. Let me show you another example with a much slower pan where I'm walking towards the camera. The next creative filming tip is a real time saver sometimes. Once again, we need to use the app for this. You want to set up the RS4 Mini on a tripod. You can use the little mini one if you want, and then just go and get into the scene that you're trying to film. Ordinarily, if I want to sit down here and frame up the shot, I'd have to keep going back to the camera, changing the tripod position or the ball head position, going back, checking it out, recording it, and that wastes a lot of time. Instead, you can just have the camera on the RS4 Mini and use the app. I'm just going to sit here, I'm going to go back, and I'm going to tap on virtual joystick. You can set the speed and smoothness here if you want to, and then just tap this little virtual joystick at the bottom to move the gimbal around. Doing this can save you so much time because it's like having a camera operator able to frame up your shots for you. Also means you can sit down and have a break. For this next shot, to make it a bit easier, you're going to want to take off the tripod quick release plate and then fit back on the extension handle tripod. This shot I call the sidewalk detail or feet glide shot. With the handle firmly attached, you're going to want to spin it down into underslung mode. You can use the joystick or turn the handle to get it pointing towards your feet. You may want to flip or modify the angle of your camera screen just so you can see what's happening. Hold the gimbal out to the side and then just walk to get a nice shot of your feet walking. This is a really nice low angle detail shot that can help to add a bit of intimacy or texture to the video that you're making.